Hallelujah! Christ is risen. The Lord is risen indeed. Hallelujah! Every year when I was growing up, that's how we would greet each other. In my home, my parents invariably were up before my brothers and I, particularly when we were teenagers, but we'd stagger out into the hall bleary-eyed or down into the family room, and they would always greet us this way with that joyful shout of celebration that Jesus has been risen. Well, this year, our celebration of Easter is more muted than in years past. Certainly, it is the case that we do celebrate Jesus's resurrection. Without a doubt, for Christians, this is the most joyful day of the year, even more joyful than Christmas. Because for Christmas, for all the celebration of the birth of the Son of God is so commercialized in our society. But in reality, the central moment in the entire Christian year is this day, this celebration that Jesus has been raised from the dead. But as we know, it is a more muted celebration. We are streaming these services. Even churches that are meeting in person to celebrate Easter, whether inside or outside, are dealing with restrictions, wearing masks, socially distant from one another. And of course, it's not just the fact that we are still laboring under these restrictions, but it's an entire year of the pandemic. The lives lost, people who have lost loved ones, friends, jobs. It has been a trial for us all. And so today, while we celebrate the resurrection, and we also celebrate the fact that these restrictions are being lifted, that more and more people are vaccinated, that we do indeed have hope. The gospel for today, Mark's gospel, is perhaps the best one that we could have had for this year. Now, it's important to remember that each gospel is different. Yes, they're telling the story of Jesus. Yes, they tell the story of his resurrection, for sure. And it's also important that what we do in terms of just normally in our minds is we kind of mash it all up together. Well, it's understandable. I mean, that's part of what we have to do as people of faith, to develop a synthesis of the events that we read about in the different texts within the Bible. But it's also important that we remember that each gospel, each book of the Bible gives us a unique point of view. And it's important for our faith that we hear and understand what that person is telling us so that we can better understand and walk in the way of Jesus, in the way of love. And Mark's ending is different. For one thing, what we have is an empty tomb. The women go, and their stone is rolled away. They go inside, and they meet what we believe is an angel. They don't encounter the risen Christ. This is the one gospel where there is no resurrection appearance. The women hear the news from the angel, the one who was laid there. He is raised. The one who was crucified, He is raised. And then, tellingly, the angel says to the women to go, to tell the disciples, and to tell Peter. But the story ends so abruptly because they run out of the tomb in fear. And the story tells us they tell no one. Well, for centuries, many people have found this ending completely unsatisfactory. Going back to the 2nd century, we find additions to what scholars believe is the original ending. What do we want? Well, we all want those resurrection appearances, don't we? We all want that sense of certainty. But Mark gives us a promise instead of a resurrection appearance. And then, unsettlingly, he tells us that the women run in fear and they tell no one. But Mark's ending, some biblical scholars would say, is actually the most masterful ending of all the Gospels, because it invites us into the story. It invites us to hear the news of Christ's resurrection without seeing the risen Christ. And it gives us the promise that Jesus goes before us and will meet us in Galilee, which stands for the day-to-day places of our lives. This pandemic, it has been hard. I was talking to someone the other day who said it's been a test. And that's certainly true. I know I have had moments during this time when, in a place of despair, I called out to God for help. And each time, in some way that transcended my understanding, something happened to make a difference for me. Of all the gospel texts, this text, I believe, is the most real. It tells us that the God of our salvation, the God who sent Jesus into the world, the God who died for us, rolled the stone away and was raised from the dead. This God tells us that even in the most difficult times and places of our lives, Christ is risen and promises to meet us where we live, where we work, where we learn, where we play. Promises to go before us, and with Jesus, to raise us to new life.